not have it all quite figured out. No, but I don't think it matters. I think you like it that way. Jesus, you're the potter and I'm the clay. You're making me like you more and more every day. Oh, not perfect, don't always get it right. I'd rather walk by faith, not by my foolish sight. So lead me on, hey, lead me on. Come on, lead me on. Please lead me on. It's not me I'm leaning on. Lead me on. Yeah. Oh, Jesus, keep leading me. I put one foot in front of the other. Yeah. I won't ever look back. No, no, no. What you have for me is better. Yeah. I'll let go of my past. I know that the future is nothing to fear. So, I know that you're holding it all in your hand. What you have for me is better, better. And you will lead me. You will lead. You will lead. Oh, Jesus, this is my prayer. Oh, Jesus, Jesus, you can. Good evening. Hope everybody is doing amazing, having a really good day, evening, whatever, wherever, and whatever time it is where you are. Y'all, I'm talking today about protecting the neck. Protecting the neck. So I first want to just qualify. I'm Holly with Hollie. If you hear me, if you are new to my channel, please click on subscribe because I don't want you to miss the word that I'm going to deliver right now and what I'll be sharing with you over the next for however long the Lord got me speaking to you all, because there's some really amazing things that are coming on the channel. But tonight I'm talking about protecting the neck. So when I say that, there's probably a lot of different things that comes to your mind, right? Like protecting the neck, like in the natural, like the literal physical, in the spirit, like what does that mean? And it's all encompassing. We're going to talk about it. But what came to mind for me when this word was dropped in my spirit was there was like this conversation happening in social media. Hey, everybody, I see y'all saying hey. It's so good to see y'all online tonight. There was some things that were dropped in my spirit. And one thing that I was brought back to my memory was there was this conversation on social media recently about an actress by the name of Nia Long, and she was talking about her neck, like her literal neck. Somebody was complimenting on how good her neck looked, right? And so what she shared was, well, I've actually been taking care of that part of my body ever since I think she's in her 50s. She said ever since she was in her 20s. And so she was basically letting these folks know, look, it looks like it does because I have been doing the work for 20 plus years to make sure it was taken care of. Fun fact, when I was in my early 20s, I remember being on a trip and I had an opportunity to meet some Parisian women who were like estheticians. Like they did everything face, body care. And one of the things that the women told me when we were going through like my my skincare routine was protect your neck. They said protect your neck. So they showed me how to apply the creams. You know, you want to go up and you want to go like this because they're like, that's going to keep the wrinkles away. That's going to keep everything, you know, very nice and, you know, from wrinkling too soon, y'all. So I'm going somewhere with this. So for the last, well, I'm telling my age now, 20 something years, I've been doing that. So when I heard her say that, I was like, yeah, that's some great advice. I've been doing that. So y'all, that's in the natural, right? Protecting the neck, right? Why? Because the neck is going to start to show what? Age. The neck is actually going to show evidence of who you really are, of your real identity. That's why you want to take care of the neck, because it's going to show there first, y'all. But when we talk about protecting the neck, when we talk about that from like a spiritual perspective, what the Lord brought to me was a very specific book, which was the book of Ruth. And I was taken to the 4th chapter. Okay, so the book of Ruth, 4th chapter. And so what was brought to me was when from a spiritual perspective, when we talk about protecting the neck, we're talking about protecting the woman. Okay, I'm talking about the woman. That's the neck, the helpmeet. That's what we're talking about in the spirit. Hi, how are you? It's good to see you guys on. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight, all rooted in the book of Ruth, but specifically chapter 4. So if you don't know, if you're not sure of, you know, the story, you certainly want to read from start to finish, but I'm going to focus on chapter 4. But what I'll say is that Ruth was a Moabite woman, and if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, y'all give me some grace. And so basically she was from a foreign land, right? And she was a widow. And she came to this place with her mother-in-law, right? And what happened is there was an opportunity for a kinsman redeemer to come in and not only acquire the land that belonged to Ruth and Naomi, but also as part of acquiring that land, that kinsman redeemer was going to have to acquire Ruth, a widow. He would have to take her on as his wife. Now, if you know the story, or if you know enough about the story, you know that Boaz actually wanted Ruth, right? But if there was legally another person who had claim to her because of the land, right? Because it's the closest, nearest relative who had legal claim. They had to have the opportunity to have what we call first right of refusal, right? First rights of refusal. So when Boaz presented to this gentleman, hey, you have an opportunity to acquire all of this land that belongs to Ruth and Naomi. Do you want the land? And this gentleman was like, absolutely. I absolutely want it. And so then what was shared was, okay, so when you acquire it, you also require the dead man's wife. You acquire the widow. And at that point, the gentleman said, no, I cannot do that. By acquiring that, that's going to actually just have an adverse impact, a negative impact on me, on my life, on my inheritance, on everything connected to me. He wasn't willing to protect the neck. He wasn't willing to take on that. He wasn't really take on that, what he would consider a risk, right? To his reputation. But what we understand from this, y'all, what we understand from this is what the neck represents is the vulnerability, the honor, the strength, and the direction. Okay? That's what the neck actually represents, right? The neck is a very sensitive part of your body, right? That has to be protected. The head cannot actually move. The head cannot actually function without the neck. And so what occurred in this particular case is by this gentleman not willing to protect the vulnerability of the neck, it was best that he passed that up, right? It was best that he identified that he didn't have the capacity for that, so that he could allow that allow her rather to be acquired by a true kinsman redeemer. And that's what happened with Boaz, right? Boaz became her protector, her covering. And what Boaz was able to do was redeem her future, her legacy. And so what we know is that she was in this vulnerable position. Just think about it. So we think about the vulnerability of the neck in the natural, but we think about this through the lens of the spiritual and of this particular book. You know, what were all of those things that made her vulnerable? She was a widow. She was from a foreign land. She had no covering. Her husband was dead. He had passed on. And that left her economically exposed, because you got to think about that. This is her land. This is what belongs to them, but she needed someone to come in and acquire it and be willing to acquire her in order for her to move forward. And so what he did was Boaz, he was able to actually protect her, right? Publicly, right? Not privately, not, just maybe I'll do this for you, but I'm not going to say anything. He protected her publicly, because when he held this gentleman accountable, he did so publicly. Okay? He wanted to make it known. He wanted it on record that he was going to acquire this woman and everything connected to her. Okay? And so what happened in that public, like taking on and accepting this publicly, is that he not only redeemed her future, which was her land, her lineage, her legacy, but he shifted her life from survival to destiny, because there was destiny attached to that, quote, acquisition. And so she was restored. She was restored in that way. And so what that tells us, what that helps us to understand, is that covering actually protected her honor. So the covering she had from Boaz protected her honor, because he honored her in front of witnesses. They blessed her publicly, right? The elders blessed her publicly, and it elevated her name. So what are we talking about? We're talking about protecting the neck. And the reason why we're going in detail about protecting the neck, which is the woman, is because the neck is the thing that does what? It helps the head to be able to move, to be able to function, to be able to directionally, make decisions, be decisive, and be strong. So if Boaz had not protected the neck, i.e. Ruth, that would have an adverse effect on him, right? And so Ruth, he understood, he actually had the knowing that she was his helpmeet. Okay? And what that meant is that she was all of the things that a helpmeet would be. She was strategic, she was obedient, she was aligned, she was going to strengthen his lineage, and she carried generational purpose. But not only for him, but protected her calling, right? So we talk a lot about that on this channel, about how, my God, how advancing the kingdom is the goal of any work that we're doing. It's the goal of anything that God places in our hands, is to advance his kingdom. Yes, we get fruit from it. There's a lot of beautiful, amazing things that come from that obedience, from that surrender, from that alignment. But we must remember that it's more of him and less of us, right? Is to advance his kingdom. And so by protecting her, he was protecting her calling. Why was that? Because Ruth carried the lineage of David, and we know that the descendant was Jesus, right? Think about that. It mattered that much that Boaz protected her in the way that he did, because that very step, that very action is what led to us being able to have our Christ, our Savior, right? It's amazing how sometimes there could be one small action, one small thing, one small step of obedience that we may take. It may seem small and minute, but you never know what's connected to it, because we don't always see, what's down the line. We see what's in front of us, right? We can make projections. We can come up with what our plan would be, right? Our 30, 60, 90, or our 5-year plan, but only God truly knows what's ahead. And so the steps that we're asked to take today, that God asks for us to take right now, are because He knows what's coming. That's why there can be things that are asked of you by God that may not make sense to you, that may not feel like they align with where you've been going, right? Whether it's a sudden thing, like all of a sudden, hey, I want you to switch careers, or all of a sudden, I want you to move to another place, or all of a sudden, I want you to, maybe shed these particular people from your life. Like there could be some things that are jarring in the moment that we just have no idea and understanding of, because in the natural, everything was fine. But what happens is, because God is looking ahead, God is looking at not just what's happening today, but generations from now. God looks at everything connected to you, and He looks at the work He can do through you. That's what we have to understand, is that He's looking at this through a lens that we don't have. And so when Boaz went to, before the people and claimed Ruth, right? He devised kind of a nice little plan, though, didn't he, y'all? The way that he was able to, convince this closest relative to say, well, no, I'm not going to take her on. That's just too much for me, because he knew he wanted her all along. But what a plan, because for him, he was able to acquire the woman that he wanted. But what they didn't know, my God, is that by taking that step, right? By being obedient to what the Lord wanted, who is connected to Ruth? As I said, Jesus, David, and then through David, Jesus. So there is always purpose behind the things that the Lord asks of us, even when we don't understand it. That's why we got to protect the call on our lives. You have to protect the call on your life. And so that means that in these scenarios where you are identifying, your helpmeet, where you are identifying, who is going to be connected to your purpose, you have to be really strategic about that thing. And when I say strategic, I mean stay aligned with God. These are not the ways, these are not the opportunities and situations where you want to be going rogue, making your own decisions, saying, I got this one. I don't think I really need to get, divine guidance on this. Like, I know what I want, who I want, when I want, I'm good. No, because you don't know what's connected to that, right? And you don't want to not only miss seasons, but you don't want to forfeit destiny. This is a real thing. And that's why when we talk so much, especially on this channel, about staying surrendered, about getting in the secret place, getting in the quiet place, which is prayer, right? And for some, hey, fasting, prayer, becoming consecrated so that you can hear, right? So that you can be really sure of what God is asking of you. When we serve a God that extends grace, right? We serve a God who is a loving Father. So we never should walk this walk feeling as though we've got to be perfect, get it right, heard it perfectly, and if we misstep, then we done messed up our life. It doesn't work like that, right? Because God does judge the heart. So He knows if in your heart, that you are wanting to walk in obedience, but you just made a misstep, you'll get corrected. You'll get corrected. Because He's going to get the purpose done that He needs done. Now, if you're just disobedient, then He might get it done through somebody else. But He is a loving father. So you'll get correction. You just got to be open to correction, right? And so what we understand is that Boaz became that kinsman, that true kinsman redeemer for Ruth. You know, while he wasn't legally the one who was appointed to take her on, to lead her, he stepped up to become that kinsman redeemer, right? And so that meant that Ruth became legally secured. So while she had so many vulnerabilities in her life, right? Like, think about all those things, because in the natural for yourselves, like, what are all of those vulnerabilities, right? For her, it was, she was a widow. She was from a foreign land. You know, she may not have always found herself in a space where she was held in the highest regard just because of those things that she had no control over. But he saw purpose, right? And so by Ruth being, because we got to think about this too, because we're giving Boaz a lot of credit for his obedience and for him taking on what it is that the Lord wanted him to do. But we got to also take a moment to look at Ruth and the loyalty that she showed to Naomi, right? And how tough that was for her to show that love and that loyalty to Naomi, a woman who had gotten very, very bitter. But yet Ruth stayed by her side. So that showed you the heart that Ruth had. Hey, good evening. Hey, everybody. That shows you the heart that she had. And it also, it gives us the evidence of that God will show loyalty through the outcome, right? So if you count up the cost, my God, if you count up the cost, if you look at the events, if you look at the process, it would be easy for someone to get weary, even in well-doing, right? But what happens is that when they get to the outcome, then they are able to truly see what God was doing all along. You ever been in those situations where it's been really tough, but then something happens all of a sudden, and you're like, wow, that's what all that was about? Like, that is what the Lord does. And it's not to say that everything has to be this arduous process, right? That everything has to feel like you're in quicksand or that you're dredging through mud. But if you stay faithful, right? If you stay surrendered, if you stay rooted in the word, if you stay rooted in God, then God is going to show his loyalty through the outcome, right? So there's this, what we could see from this particular story is Ruth's vulnerability, her honor, and the calling on her life were publicly protected and secured by Boaz, right? And so in many ways, this is a story of redemption, right? There was the restoration of her lineage, but this is a story of redemption. And what that makes me think about is, how are you, and I'm talking about this in the natural, so whether you are in a relationship, whether you're not in a relationship, whether it's a friendship with same sex or whatever, because I'm talking about true friendship, how are you regarding that person when they're not around? How do you speak of that person when they're not around? What words are you using when they're not around? What is that thing? Character is who you are when nobody's looking. That's what your true character is. How are you behaving? How are you moving? Right? Right? That's that protection and of that vulnerability, because what's within that vulnerability are that person's identity, their calling, their emotions. And so if there is no honor, if there is no protection of that person's name, of that person's reputation, of the process that person is going through, then you get the opposite effect, which is what? Manipulation, spiritual attacks, what people call, warfare, confusion, and misalignment. And that's one of the ways you can kind of tell when we talk about being equally yoked. You have to ask yourself, has the warfare increased? Is there more confusion? Does this feel misaligned? So what we learn from this book is very simple. And what the Lord is showing us when he talks about protecting the neck is very simple. The neck turns the head, right? The head cannot turn without the neck. While the head represents leadership, that head cannot turn without that neck being strong, solid, protected, cared for, nurtured, right? But what we also know is that the body follows the head. So if we're talking about the neck as the woman, the head as the man, and the body following the head, then that's what we talk about when we are going into the depths of like submission, right? We know that both people have to be submitted to God, right? But then there's order, there's natural order, but there's biblical order where the woman can be submitted to the man because they both are submitted to God. Because again, that neck is what helps that head turn, but then the body follows the head. And what that means is everything else is going to flow from there, right? The protection of that family, right? We're talking about the warfare that can come, that likely does come, especially when there is kingdom purpose that's associated with a union, right? It's the ability to shut out those voices, to shut out the quote enemy from the attack of that family. Because why? Because the neck is strong, the head is aligned in leadership, and the body is following the head. But when there's a disconnect, when those things are not in alignment, that's when you get the outcomes that many in the natural call what? Lord wants us to, y'all, then we know that the head can't move without the neck, and we need to protect that at all costs, right? So I want to invite you to take an opportunity to really ground yourself in the book of Ruth, because really what that story is showing us, is that while there was an opportunity for that land, right, and for that person to be acquired by the true legal heir who was supposed to come in and really take ownership of Ruth, right? And that's how, we're talking about back in the, biblical days. That person was able to say, I can't do this. I know the cost. I know what comes along with this. I can't take that on. And that gave the opportunity for God's will to be done through Boaz, right? Who took on what came with Ruth, those vulnerabilities, right? Those things that others may have looked at and said, I don't know, like that's a lot. Like she from where? And she a what? But Boaz took that on. And what came from that is the ability for us to even be able to say that we are followers of Christ, right? Because who would have known that attached to that lineage would be Jesus? And so that's just a reminder in its simplest form for us to make sure that we do not lean into our own understanding. So many things that happen that, you try to qualify, right? And say, well, if this, then that. You try to find a way to be able to maybe justify direction, actions, decisions. But sometimes you just got to rest in God. You just got to follow God, and you just have to know that if the Lord is leading you to it, then there's something connected to it that even you may not see. But you have to trust that the outcome is an outcome that is going to not only bless you, but bless everyone connected to you. So that's it. I just wanted to come on and talk about protecting the neck. I wanted to make sure that I shared with you the word that was dropped in my spirit. And I pray that you are having an amazing day, an amazing summer. If you're not yet subscribed to Hollie, if you hear me, then I do encourage you to click the subscribe button. I would love for you to continue to follow, to watch, to listen, to learn, to contribute. And there's so many amazing things that are coming, and I don't want you to miss it. So that said, I will see you on the next video, and I hope that you have an amazing day, whatever day you're watching.